Our longest president ever was the one and only Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He served a whopping 4 terms but only finished 3 of them. He is the reason now why presidents are only allowed to be in office for a maximum of 10 years. Let's take a look at his life and his trip from New York to DC. This is Collision Course. Franklin Roosevelt was born on January 30th, 1882 in Hyde Park, New York. His parents were 6 cousins and his dad was a businessman. FDR grew up in a house of privilege and was very well off in his early years money-wise. Reportedly, when James Roosevelt took his young son to visit President Grover Cleveland in the White House, the busy president told Franklin, "I have one wish for you, little man, and that is that you will never be the president of the United States." How ironic. He also traveled to Europe many times as a young boy and also learned to play many sports, owning a sailboat at the age of 16. He attended Groton School, a boarding school where he was heavily influenced by his headmaster Endicott Peabody. His headmaster preached that Christians were responsible for helping the less fortunate. This would stay with Franklin much of his life, and he even had Peabody visit him during his presidency. All but 2 out of his 21 fellow classmates moved on to attend Harvard with him. He didn't do exceptionally well at academics or sports, but he made up for it by becoming a newspaper editor-in-chief for the Harvard Crimson, a student newspaper at Harvard. While he was there, his 5th cousin Teddy Roosevelt became president and became a role model for FDR to look up to. It was also here that he met his wife Eleanor. Again, they were distant relatives, 5th cousins twice removed. In 1904, he entered Columbia Law School. He was soon after married to Eleanor, even with a strong resistance from his mother. Soon after, he got a job with a firm on Wall Street. He had 6 kids very close to each other in age. They are Anna, James, Franklin, Elliot, FDR Jr., and John. Franklin died in his infancy early due to a heart problem. This destroyed the Roosevelts, but he soon bounced back with the birth of his 2 latest sons. His marriage with Eleanor must have been boring because he had a 20-year affair with one of his secretaries, Missy Lahan, and one of Eleanor's secretaries, Lucy Mercer. It's safe to say that they didn't exactly please his wife with this, who said that she had the memory of an elephant. She could forgive, but she couldn't forget. After these affairs, their relationship pretty much became purely business, with Eleanor building a separate house in Hyde Park for her to live in. She began to devote herself to other political causes and social causes. Enough with this relationship drama, let's get to the fun stuff, politics. FDR got elected into the New York State Senate in 1910. He was running as a Democrat in a strong Republican area, and it's safe to say one of the only reasons he won was because his cousin Teddy was still a big hero in that area. He was opposed to the bossism of Tammany Hall dominating the Democratic Party, and he was so influential that he was re-elected in 1912 and served as the chairman of Agricultural Committee. This position, he made bills that would be the predecessor to many of his New Deal programs in the later years. Due to his support for President Wilson in 1913, he was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy. One of his biggest accomplishments in this position was to create the Naval Reserve. He was great at managing his workers, and there were no strikes during his 7 years in office. This office gave him some of the experiences he would need for later on in his life when he was living as the president. He visited naval bases all over Europe to make sure that the U.S. was prepared for war. In 1921, polio struck. It left him permanently paralyzed from the waist down. He remained out of the public eye for a few years. He refused to believe that he was permanently unable to walk and founded the Roosevelt Warm Springs Institute for Rehabilitation in 1926 in Georgia. They tried hydrotherapy as well as other treatments to get him to walk again. All failed. Fun fact though, he did figure out how to walk by strapping braces to his legs and torso and swinging it back and forth. He went on to found what is today known as the March of Dimes to help paralysis victims. In 1929, he was back in the political picture as he ran and won the governor's office of New York. He was there for 4 years and soon moved on to running for the highest office in the land, President of the United States. The Republicans were still under fire in 1932 for causing the Great Depression, so it's not a surprise that FDR easily won as the Democratic nominee. This is where the New Deal began to take shape. When he took office in 1933, the Great Depression was in full swing with farm prices dropping and 1/4 of the population unemployed. He presented his plan on radio talks known as fireside chats. His New Deal involved putting America back to work. He made government programs and national park groups to hire men to do work. He also cut spending on the military to focus more on the homeland. Another one of his goals is that he kept the ban of prohibition. He established social security programs to help bring back the elderly, poor, and sick to a stable condition. He was slowly bringing the country back to the prosperity it had once been in. His second term, which he won by a landslide, was fairly quiet. He didn't pass nearly as many legislations as he did before. He tried to remake the Supreme Court to follow his orders. They had shot down many of his acts, which was not good for his goals. He was able to appoint 6 more judges. Well, he asked to appoint 6 more judges of his choosing so he could control the courts. This obviously got shot down as it would have given him way too much power over the judicial branch. He broke the traditional chain of events when he ran and won his 3rd presidency in 1940. He then became the first and only president to serve more than 2 terms. He began to arm the military again in case of war. The day after Pearl Harbor, he declared war, and the U.S. was now involved in the Second World War. He led our military through pain and suffering of the tragic war. He worked closely with Stalin and Churchill to defeat the enemy. His health continued to decline during this war, and he made many visits to the hospital. However, as he looked ahead to the next election, he completely denied that his health was in decline. He had a doctor schedule his day so that he was allowed 2 hours of midday rests to restock his health. During the 1944 election, he strongly supported the UN, by which he showed his continuing support for the U.S. to stay an international power and forget their previous isolationist policies in the 20s and 30s. In March of 1945, he made a speech to Congress in which it was quite obvious of his declining health. Many congressmen said that they were shocked at how frail and old he looked. He died later that year. His cardiologist said that he had a stroke on the day he died, which was April 12, 1945 at 3:35 p.m. He held the longest legacy ever in the presidential office. After his death, Congress passed the 2-term or 10-year law for the next presidents. Roosevelt went down in history for being the hardy man that fought through illness, war, and depression to keep this country together.